It was a quiet Thursday evening in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of evening where even the wind sounds like it's whispering secrets through the trees. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets glistening under soft streetlights. Inside my living room, my husband sat on his armchair, pretending to read, pretending not to avoid my eyes. Something had been wrong for weeks. Late nights, locked doors, half-truths wrapped in small smiles. I wasn't searching for betrayal. I was searching for peace. So I hid cameras inside the home I once built for trust. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and listen till the end, because what those cameras showed me didn't just change my marriage, it changed my life. The first sign came from the smallest thing, the way he started closing doors that were once always open. Our bedroom door, the study, even the kitchen pantry. I used to think nothing of it. After all, we'd been married for more than 40 years, and small habits change with age. But soon, every sound in that house felt off. The clinking of cutlery at midnight, the faint shuffle of footsteps when he thought I was asleep, and the smell of cologne that wasn't his. It all began to stitch into a pattern I couldn't ignore. Some nights, I'd wake up to the sound of drawers sliding open. The light beneath the door glowed faintly, and shadows moved in silence. When I asked about it the next morning, he'd say he couldn't sleep, that he was sorting through old tax papers. His tone was casual, but his eyes never stayed on mine. I tried to believe him, but the pit in my stomach only grew heavier. There was a coldness that had crept into our home, the kind that can't be fixed by warmth or words. In the mornings, the air felt stale. I'd find his phone face down on the table, screen locked, and whenever I approached, he'd pick it up like it was fragile glass. Once, I heard him whispering near the window, voice low and hurried. When he saw me standing behind him, he flinched, then smiled too quickly. I wanted to ask who he was talking to, but something inside me told me not to. I'd spent years avoiding arguments, smoothing cracks with silence, convincing myself that love meant patience. But this wasn't patience anymore. It was denial. Every evening, I made dinner like always. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, the same comfort we'd shared for decades. Yet, he barely touched the food. He'd claim he'd eaten earlier, or that he wasn't hungry. The chair across from me stayed cold longer each night. I'd find half-empty wine glasses in the sink the next morning, though I never drank anymore. And once, I found 2 of them. That's when something broke quietly inside me. I began noticing other things. The curtains in his study pulled tighter than usual, the faint scent of lavender perfume lingering on the guest towel, and his jacket missing from the hook every Tuesday night. He said he was going to his book club, but he'd return hours later smelling like rain and smoke. The old version of me would have believed it. The woman who had spent her life trusting, forgiving, and hoping would have smiled weakly and said, "All right." But that version of me had died quietly, somewhere between the excuses and the lies. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or accuse. I observed. I memorized. I made mental notes of every inconsistency, every unexplained outing, every half-truth. The strange thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in like a leak in the roof, one drop at a time, until one day you realize your whole house is flooded. I loved him deeply, but I also knew love doesn't mean blindness. It means seeing clearly and still choosing truth, no matter how painful. One afternoon, when he went out for errands, I walked through our home like a stranger. I traced my hand along the furniture, the photographs, the wedding picture that had long since lost its shine. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken things. When I stood in front of his locked study door, something inside me whispered, "Look closer." I pressed my ear against the wood and heard the faint click of a hidden latch inside. That's when I knew. Whatever was behind that door wasn't paperwork. It was the truth, waiting to be found. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls creaked, the clock ticked endlessly, and my thoughts raced. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the home I once built on love now stood on suspicion. I'd always thought betrayal looked loud, like screaming or broken glass. But now I knew better. Sometimes it hides in routine. It smiles at you at breakfast, kisses your forehead before bed, and keeps secrets behind locked doors. So, the next morning, while he left for work, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I opened my laptop and ordered 2 small hidden cameras. I told myself it was for peace of mind, but in my heart, I already knew. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was preparing for revelation. The day after ordering those cameras, I sat by the window and watched the mail truck pass. The street outside was quiet, the kind of calm that hides tension. When the small brown box finally arrived, it felt heavier than it looked. Inside were 2 tiny cameras, barely the size of buttons, with instructions that promised clarity. But I wasn't sure I wanted it. Still, I knew I had no choice. The ache of not knowing had become worse than whatever truth I might find. I waited until my husband left for his usual errands. He'd grown predictable, gone by 8, home by noon, always carrying new excuses. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I opened the box. My hands trembled as I held the cameras. One I placed above the hallway clock, angled toward the study door, the one he always kept locked. The second, I hid behind the vase on the living room shelf, facing the hallway. From there, I could see the pattern of our evenings, his footsteps, his habits, his secrets. I didn't feel like a spy. I felt like a woman trying to survive her own home. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed. I cooked his favorite dinner, the same way I'd done for decades. Slow roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a touch of rosemary. He smiled when he saw the meal, as though everything was normal. But his eyes still darted toward the study every few minutes, and that small, nervous glance told me more than words ever could. When he went to bed early, I stayed awake, pretending to knit by the lamp while my heart counted the seconds until midnight. At 11:37 p.m., he got up quietly. The floor creaked once beneath his weight. I heard him move down the hall, open the study door, and close it again, softly, carefully, as if even the dark might be listening. I didn't follow. I sat still, my palms damp, my eyes fixed on the clock that now watched for me. For the first time in my marriage, I was afraid of what I might discover about the man who'd once promised to protect me. The next morning, after he left, I turned on the small monitor linked to the cameras. The footage began to play, grainy at first, then clearer. I saw him pacing the study, opening drawers, sorting through boxes. Papers scattered across the desk, his hands shaking slightly. It looked harmless, but his face was tense, haunted almost. He wasn't calm like a man reviewing documents. He looked like someone preparing for something. I watched in silence, my tea growing cold beside me. When the footage ended, I felt both relief and dread. Nothing terrible had happened. Not yet, but something deeper was hiding under the surface. Each day that week, I repeated the same routine. He'd leave, I'd check. The house became a film reel of quiet secrets. Some recordings were empty, him staring out the window, rubbing his temples, whispering to himself. But other moments made my chest tighten. He'd pull out old photographs, some of me, some of us when we were young. Then he'd set them aside, almost angrily, as if the past was too heavy to look at. By the 4th night, I'd memorized his movements. When he'd lock the door, how long he'd stay, how carefully he'd hide the keys afterward. It wasn't guilt I saw in him anymore. It was pain, deep, unspoken, heavy pain. But I still couldn't tell what it meant. Was he planning to leave me? Was he hiding something from our past? My mind became a battlefield of possibilities. The cameras had given me eyes, but no answers. That evening, when he came home, I studied him from across the dinner table. He smiled faintly, complimented the food, even asked about my day. For a moment, I almost believed we were fine again. But then I saw it, the faint smudge of dirt on his wrist, like he'd been digging through something outside. My chest went cold. I realized the truth might not be found inside the study at all. That night, after he fell asleep, I moved quietly down the hall, past the flickering nightlight, past the locked study door. The air smelled faintly of wood and smoke. I looked toward the back door. A streak of mud trailed from the threshold to the garden. My hand shook as I touched the handle, but I didn't open it. Not yet. I returned to my room and sat in the dark until morning, waiting for courage to grow. The next day, I decided to check the footage one more time before stepping outside, because deep down, I already knew that my quiet decision had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't just about knowing anymore. It was about surviving the truth that waited to be seen. Every marriage becomes a rhythm, small rituals repeated until they form the background of life itself. For years, ours had been steady. Every morning at 7, he'd make the coffee, strong and black, just the way I liked it. I'd sit by the window, reading the newspaper, pretending not to notice when he glanced at the crossword before me. The days moved with simple, familiar patterns. Breakfast at 8, errands at noon, television humming softly after dinner. But lately, the rhythm had changed, and I could feel it deep in my bones. He still smiled, still called me dear, still kissed the top of my head before stepping out. But there was a new silence in his gestures, a pause that didn't belong. He'd return home later than usual, sometimes with mud on his shoes, sometimes smelling faintly of cigarettes though he hadn't smoked in decades. When I asked how his day was, he'd answer too quickly, words slipping through the air like cards dealt from a trembling hand. The house we had built together no longer felt like ours. The furniture stayed the same. The walls still carried the same photos. Our wedding, our son's graduation, family Christmases that now felt like another lifetime. But the air inside had changed. It felt charged, restless, as if waiting for something to happen. Every evening, I'd hear him moving through the rooms after I went to bed. He thought I was asleep, but age has a way of teaching you the difference between dreams and instincts. I'd lie still, listening. The soft creak of the stairs, the faint sound of drawers opening, the whisper of papers being moved. Sometimes I'd hear the quiet rustle of a bag being zipped shut. The first few times, I told myself not to overthink it. But every night, as those same sounds returned, my heart learned their pattern like a song I could no longer ignore. During the day, he'd pretend nothing had changed. He'd ask if I needed anything from the market, compliment my cooking, and hum along with the old radio like always. But even his hum felt different, slower, broken. His eyes would wander toward the locked study door, as if drawn by something magnetic. I began to notice small details. His keys always stayed in his pocket now. The mail pile grew thinner, and the bank statements on the counter had stopped coming. It wasn't the behavior of a man planning an affair. It was something else, something heavier. It was the behavior of a man who carried secrets too big to say out loud. One evening, after dinner, I tried to sit with him on the couch the way we used to. He sat stiff, his hands clasped tightly, his gaze distant. The television flickered, but neither of us watched. I realized then how many words had died in the air between us over the years. Small truths swallowed for the sake of peace, small pains buried under routine. We had built a marriage of endurance, not communication. When he finally stood up, muttering something about checking the locks, I watched him walk away. The curve of his back, the tired slowness in his steps. It hit me how fragile he looked, how old we'd both become, and yet how far apart we now stood inside the same house. Love, I realized, doesn't disappear in a storm. It erodes quietly, one locked door at a time. That night, I watched the footage again. The hallway camera showed him standing by the study, holding something small in his hands, a photograph perhaps. He stared at it for a long time before pressing it to his chest and whispering something I couldn't hear. Then he unlocked the study, went inside, and stayed there for hours. I paused the video and stared at the frozen image of him on the screen. My husband, the man who'd once held my hand through every hardship, now a stranger behind a locked door. A part of me wanted to turn everything off, delete the footage, and pretend life was still the same. But another part, the quiet, stronger part, knew that whatever truth hid inside that room had already changed us forever. By the time the clock struck midnight, I'd made up my mind. Tomorrow, I would look. Not through the footage, not through suspicion, but through my own eyes. Whatever was behind that door, love, loss, or betrayal, it was mine to face. Because sometimes, even after 40 years of marriage, you realize that the only way to protect your heart is to stop pretending it doesn't already know the truth. That night, the house felt like a stranger's skin, familiar to the eye but cold to the touch. Every sound echoed sharper than usual. The ticking clock in the living room, the distant hum of the refrigerator, even the slow drip from the faucet felt deliberate, like time itself had started watching me. My husband had gone to bed early, or at least pretended to. I could hear his steady breathing from down the hall, but something about it sounded rehearsed. Too even, too quiet, as if he wanted me to believe he was asleep. When the clock struck 11, the pattern broke. The bed creaked. I froze. His footsteps followed, careful, measured, as though he was walking barefoot. He passed our room, paused at the end of the corridor, then turned toward the study. The door clicked open, soft as a sigh, and the light underneath it spilled across the floor like a thin blade. My heart thudded so hard I thought he might hear it. I sat up slowly, my palms damp against the blanket. The thought of confronting him crossed my mind, but something stronger, fear, curiosity, or maybe the need for truth, held me still. I waited until the light under the door dimmed, then slipped out of bed and into the living room. The hallway camera blinked faintly, a single red dot in the dark. It was recording every second. I stood there for a moment, barefoot on the cold floor, listening to the faint rustle of papers behind the door. There was no anger in his movements, only quiet purpose. He wasn't destroying or searching. He was building something, the sound of wood scraping, tools clinking. My confusion deepened. I returned to bed before he could notice I was gone. My body lay still, but my mind was awake until dawn. When he finally came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. His hands were trembling when he lifted the blanket, his breathing uneven. He turned his back to me, and I could smell something faint, varnish, or dust from old wood. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He whistled softly while making coffee, even asked about my sleep. I answered politely, my voice calm, though my chest was tight. Every gesture of his now felt like a performance. He read the newspaper, folded it neatly, then left for the day. The moment the front door shut, I moved toward the small monitor I had hidden behind the flower vase. The footage began. For the first few minutes, it was ordinary. Him entering the study, sorting drawers. But then the camera caught something strange. He pulled out a box from beneath the old rug, heavy and wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly and set it on the desk. It wasn't money or papers. It was wood, planks, tools, paint, brushes. He began assembling something piece by piece, his movements steady, almost ceremonial. Then came the part that made my breath catch. He opened a folder filled with photographs, black and white pictures of us, of our son as a child, of family vacations I'd forgotten about. Some were wrinkled, some stained with time. He placed each photo on the wooden surface, one by one, pressing them down gently, as though fixing memories into place. For a moment, I thought he might be building a shrine. The camera caught him wiping his eyes once, his shoulders shaking. When the footage ended, I sat in silence. My thoughts ran wild. Grief, guilt, confusion. Was this an act of love or obsession? He'd been hiding something that looked harmless but felt heavy with meaning. That night, when he returned, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every word he spoke sounded like an echo of something else, something he wasn't saying. I replayed the footage again before bed, slower this time, watching every detail, his trembling hands, the way he touched each photo like it was alive, the way he paused before one picture, our wedding day. He stared at it for nearly a minute, then kissed the corner of it before setting it down. I turned off the monitor. My chest ached in a way that no betrayal could explain, because deep down I realized this wasn't about secrets or deceit. It was about loss, Something inside him had broken quietly, and he'd been trying to fix it in the only way he knew, by building something from what remained of us. Still, I couldn't shake the fear that love, when left unspoken too long, can start to look like madness, and I needed to know which one I was living with. The fourth night was when everything changed. The air in the house felt different, still but charged, like a storm holding its breath before it breaks. I sat in the dim light of the living room, pretending to read, the clock ticking past midnight. My husband hadn't come home yet. The wind brushed against the windows, and I could hear the faint rattle of the back gate swinging in the dark. When I finally heard his car pull into the driveway, I turned off the lamp and sat quietly. The hallway camera's small red light blinked, waiting, watching, loyal to my doubts. The front door opened slowly, and there he was, stepping into the light like a man carrying ghosts. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had settled there. He locked the door behind him, dropped his keys on the table, and stood still for a moment, breathing hard. Then, without even removing his shoes, he walked straight toward the study. The sound of the door unlocking cut through the silence. My heart followed him down the hall. The camera in the sitting room captured it all. The glint of the key, the hesitation in his movements, the way he paused before switching on the lamp. When I replayed the footage later, I saw what I hadn't been able to see with my eyes that night. He stood by the desk for a long time, hands trembling as he opened the drawer where I kept old letters and photographs. He pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper, one I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, he untied the string and opened it. Inside were my letters, dozens of them, written to my first husband before he died, the man I'd lost long before I met him. Letters full of young love, grief, and hope. I had kept them tucked away for decades, hidden behind drawers I thought he never touched. He sat down, unwrapped the first letter, and began to read. At first, I thought the camera had glitched because I saw his face change, his jaw trembling, his eyes flooding with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. He read each letter carefully, lips moving silently, as though he was speaking to a ghost. The footage caught him pressing one page against his forehead, his body shaking, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then, slowly, he began to gather the letters again, stacking them neatly, one over the other. His hands moved with such gentleness that it almost broke me. He placed them back in the box, then reached into the drawer for a small velvet pouch. From it, he pulled out my wedding ring, the one I thought I'd lost years ago. He held it in his palm for a long time, then slipped it into the box beside the letters. That was the moment I realized this wasn't betrayal. It was something else entirely. The man I had grown suspicious of wasn't hiding an affair. He wasn't spending our savings or keeping secrets for someone else. He was mourning, not for me, but for the version of us that had quietly died over the years. The hidden cameras hadn't captured lies. They had caught grief trying to find a place to breathe. I remember sitting in front of that footage for hours, my fingers pressed to my lips. It was strange, feeling both guilt and relief at the same time. Guilt for doubting him, relief for finally understanding what had haunted him. He hadn't been building a life apart from me. He'd been trying to rebuild the one we had lost. The next morning, I went into the study for the first time in months. The room smelled of dust, varnish, and something softer, like old paper touched by tears. On the desk sat the wooden box, closed neatly, a photograph of us from our wedding day resting on top. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. For the first time, I understood what love looked like when it grew old and quiet. It wasn't flowers or words. It was a man sitting alone in the dark, holding on to memories just to feel close to them again. That night, when he came home, I didn't ask where he had been or what he was doing. I simply poured him a cup of tea and placed it in front of him. He looked at me for a long time, then smiled. A small, tired, honest smile. It was enough. Because sometimes what we think are secrets are really just ways of remembering what once kept us alive. The day I finally opened that door, the house was quiet enough to hear my own pulse. Morning light filtered through the curtains, stretching long golden fingers across the hallway. The air smelled faintly of dust and wood polish, a scent that had grown stronger over the past few weeks. My husband had left early, saying he had errands in town. I watched his car disappear down the road before turning toward the study. For years, that room had been his world. His desk, his books, his projects. I used to peek in when we were younger, watching him tinker with clocks or fix broken furniture. But lately, it had become a place of secrets, a locked chest in a house built on shared life. My hand shook slightly as I reached into the drawer where I kept an old key. It was cold against my palm, the metal heavy with history. The key slid into the lock, hesitated, then turned with a soft click. The sound echoed through the empty house. A final permission. When the door opened, the first thing I noticed was the light, warm and golden, spilling from a single lamp in the corner. The room wasn't dark or sinister as I'd imagined. It was filled with gentle order. Wooden shelves lined the walls, each stacked with old photo albums, cards, and keepsakes I hadn't seen in decades. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest, polished to a deep shine. Around it were scattered tools, glue, varnish, and rolls of fabric. On the desk, I saw open boxes containing family photographs, birthday cards, and tiny trinkets from our early years. Ticket stubs from our honeymoon, our son's first drawing, the receipt from the hospital the day he was born. He had been gathering pieces of our past. My eyes drifted to a small pile beside the chair, bits of old letters and photos, some with burn marks around the edges. That explained the faint smell of smoke I had noticed at night. It wasn't destruction, it was transformation. He had been burning away the damaged parts, keeping only what time hadn't ruined. As I stepped closer, I saw something that stopped me cold. Resting neatly on top of the chest was my old handkerchief, the one embroidered with our initials on our wedding day. It was folded perfectly, almost reverently, as if waiting for me to find it. Beneath it was a photograph, our family at a picnic long ago, sunlight washing over us like grace. I knelt beside the chest and touched the wood. It was smooth, warm, alive somehow. My fingers traced the edges, feeling the care in every joint and polished stroke. He hadn't built this for himself. He had built it for us. I lifted the lid slowly, afraid it might fall apart under the weight of its meaning. Inside were compartments filled with fragments of our shared years. The small ceramic bird I'd bought at a flea market, a strand of my gray hair tied with ribbon, the pocket watch his father had given him, my old recipe book with grease stains from every Sunday roast. But what undid me were the notes, dozens of them, folded and labeled by date, each one written in his hand. Some were apologies for small arguments, some were confessions of love he never said aloud, and some were just lines like, "You looked beautiful this morning." My knees weakened. I sat on the floor and read each note slowly, the tears coming before I could stop them. Every word felt like a piece of the man I'd stopped recognizing, coming back to life on the page. When I finally closed the chest, I realized that the cameras I'd placed around the house, those silent witnesses, had recorded something rare. They hadn't caught betrayal or deceit. They had captured devotion being rebuilt in secret. My husband hadn't been distant because he stopped loving me. He had been distant because he was trying to remember how to show it again. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by the quiet hum of the past. Then I turned off the light and locked the door, not out of fear, but out of respect. Some secrets, once understood, don't need to be revisited. That night, I removed the cameras. They had served their purpose. I no longer needed to watch what love looked like in the dark. I could feel it again. Not loud, not new, but steady, honest, and alive. The next morning arrived with a kind of stillness that felt heavier than silence. The light outside was soft, filtered through thin curtains that swayed gently in the morning breeze. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a ghost of warmth in an otherwise cold house. My eyes wandered toward the study door, now locked again, but no longer mysterious. I knew what was inside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I felt something deeper, a quiet, painful understanding. The cameras had shown me what my eyes had missed for years. Love doesn't always vanish when it grows quiet. Sometimes it hides behind guilt, memory, and grief. Watching him build that wooden chest, seeing the way his hands trembled as he held those photographs, I realized I had misunderstood him. I thought he was pulling away because his love had dimmed. In truth, he was trying to keep it alive in the only way he knew, by preserving what we once were. I spent most of that morning sitting by the window, staring at the light shifting across the floorboards. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed. Children on bicycles, the postman's steps, a distant car engine. But inside me, something had turned. I had spent weeks haunted by suspicion, convinced that the distance between us meant betrayal. Yet, what I found was devotion, awkward, hidden, but real. Later that day, I opened the study door once more. The smell of wood and old paper greeted me like an old friend. I stood in the doorway, letting the sunlight fall across the chest he had built. Dust floated in the air, catching the light like tiny sparks. I ran my fingers over the edge of the box again, the smooth surface cool beneath my skin. My reflection wavered faintly in the polish. Older, softer, wiser. On the desk lay a single envelope I hadn't noticed before. My name was written on it in his uneven handwriting. My heart thudded as I picked it up. The paper was thick, creased from being handled too many times. Inside was a note, short, trembling, and heartbreakingly honest. He wrote about fear, the kind that settles quietly in a man's chest as he grows old. Fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough, fear of losing the woman who had been his compass for 4 decades. He admitted that the secret room was his refuge, a place where he could hold on to us without burdening me with his grief. He wrote, "I didn't know how to tell you I missed you even when you were sitting next to me." By the time I finished reading, my tears had blurred the words. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. The truth had finally revealed itself, not through confrontation, but through quiet observation. The cameras had caught him crying, but what they truly exposed was how love can wear the face of loneliness. That night, I deleted every recording. One by one, the clips disappeared, the evidence, the fear, the suspicion. I didn't need them anymore. The truth was no longer on a screen. It lived in that wooden chest, in the letters, and in the hands of the man who built them. When he returned home, I greeted him with calmness he didn't expect. I told him dinner was ready, and for a long time, we ate in silence. But it was a good silence, not the heavy kind that divides people, but the kind that heals. His eyes met mine a few times, uncertain but hopeful. I saw the same man I had fallen in love with years ago, older, sadder, but still there. After we finished eating, he reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. For the first time in a long while, I let him hold mine. No words were spoken, because words were no longer needed. We both knew what had been found and what had been lost. That night, I sat alone for a while after he'd gone to bed. I looked out the window at the dark sky and whispered softly into the quiet, "Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It rebuilds you." I turned off the light and went to bed, my heart lighter than it had been in months. I didn't need to record life anymore. I was finally living it again. That evening carried a quiet I will never forget. The sky outside was pale and still, the kind of color that happens just before dusk, not yet night, but long past day. My husband sat at the table, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on nothing. I placed the kettle on the stove, letting the sound of boiling water fill the silence between us. It wasn't tension anymore. It was something heavier, truth waiting to be spoken. When I turned around, he was already crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears tracing the same lines time had already carved into his face. I didn't speak. I waited, the way you wait for a wound to stop bleeding on its own. Finally, he began to talk, slowly, haltingly, like every word weighed more than it should. He confessed that he had been lost, not in betrayal or anger, but in memory. After our son moved away and the house grew quieter, he said he'd started feeling like a guest in his own life. The laughter, the arguments, the routines that once filled our home had faded, and what remained was a silence too big for him to bear. He told me about the nights he would sit alone in that room, surrounded by old photographs, feeling the years collapse around him. He'd read my letters to my first husband, not out of curiosity, but because they reminded him of how deeply I could love. He said he had begun to fear that I no longer loved him that way, that I saw him only as a duty, not as the man who had once been my everything. His voice cracked when he said that. He covered his face with his hands, shaking. I stood there, my heart breaking in slow motion. For weeks, I had been certain those locked doors hid something dark, but all they hid was grief, quiet, complicated, human grief. He said he built the wooden box to hold on to us, to remind himself that even though time had taken our youth and life had taken our simplicity, what we shared was still real. The reason he cried over those letters wasn't jealousy. It was mourning for all the versions of ourselves we had outgrown and lost. He admitted he'd felt guilty for years. Guilty for the days he worked too much and forgot our anniversaries. Guilty for not being strong when I was sick. Guilty for losing pieces of himself while trying to hold everyone else together. He said every nail he hammered into that box was an apology, every photograph a confession. I stood still, listening, each word a wave washing over me. I had waited so long for anger, for explanations, for blame, but what I got was something far deeper, the kind of truth that only love, stripped of pride, can speak. When his words faltered, I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, I saw the boy he once was, the man he tried to be, and the husband I had almost forgotten. His eyes were red, but there was peace in them now, the kind that comes only after the heart empties itself completely. We didn't say anything else. The kettle whistled softly, forgotten on the stove. I turned it off and poured 2 cups of tea. We sat there side by side, sipping slowly, the warmth between us rebuilding something I thought was gone forever. Later that night, I watched him sleep. His breathing was calm, steady. The lines on his face seemed softer somehow, like the years had released their grip on him. I realized then that love doesn't survive because it's perfect. It survives because it forgives. It bends without breaking, it waits without speaking, and it listens even when it's been hurt. That's what those cameras taught me. That truth can hurt, but it can also heal. That sometimes the person you suspect of betraying you is really just trying to find a way to love you again. I turned off the last light in the hallway that night, feeling lighter than I had in months. The air in the house felt different, not haunted anymore, but home again. And as I stood by the doorway, I whispered to myself, sometimes it takes breaking trust to see what was always true. Because in the end, the hidden cameras didn't reveal a secret lover or a lie. They revealed the simplest truth of all, that love, even when it hides, still finds its way back home. That evening carried a quiet I will never forget. The sky outside was pale and still, the kind of color that happens just before dusk, not yet night, but long past day. My husband sat at the table, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on nothing. I placed the kettle on the stove, letting the sound of boiling water fill the silence between us. It wasn't tension anymore. It was something heavier, truth waiting to be spoken. When I turned around, he was already crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears tracing the same lines time had already carved into his face. I didn't speak. I waited, the way you wait for a wound to stop bleeding on its own. Finally, he began to talk, slowly, haltingly, like every word weighed more than it should. He confessed that he had been lost, not in betrayal or anger, but in memory. After our son moved away and the house grew quieter, he said he'd started feeling like a guest in his own life. The laughter, The arguments, the routines that once filled our home had faded, and what remained was a silence too big for him to bear. He told me about the nights he would sit alone in that room, surrounded by old photographs, feeling the years collapse around him. He'd read my letters to my first husband not out of curiosity, but because they reminded him of how deeply I could love. He said he had begun to fear that I no longer loved him that way, that I saw him only as a duty, not as the man who had once been my everything. His voice cracked when he said that. He covered his face with his hands, shaking. I stood there, my heart breaking in slow motion. For weeks, I had been certain those locked doors hid something dark, but all they hid was grief. Quiet, complicated, human grief. He said he built the wooden box to hold on to us, to remind himself that even though time had taken our youth and life had taken our simplicity, what we shared was still real. The reason he cried over those letters wasn't jealousy. It was mourning for all the versions of ourselves we had outgrown and lost. He admitted he'd felt guilty for years, guilty for the days he worked too much and forgot our anniversaries, guilty for not being strong when I was sick, guilty for losing pieces of himself while trying to hold everyone else together. He said every nail he hammered into that box was an apology, every photograph a confession. I stood still, listening, each word a wave washing over me. I had waited so long for anger, for explanations, for blame, but what I got was something far deeper, the kind of truth that only love, stripped of pride, can speak. When his words faltered, I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, I saw the boy he once was, the man he tried to be, and the husband I had almost forgotten. His eyes were red, but there was peace in them now, the kind that comes only after the heart empties itself completely. We didn't say anything else. The kettle whistled softly, forgotten on the stove. I turned it off and poured 2 cups of tea. We sat there side by side, sipping slowly, the warmth between us rebuilding something I thought was gone forever. Later that night, I watched him sleep. His breathing was calm, steady. The lines on his face seemed softer somehow, like the years had released their grip on him. I realized then that love doesn't survive because it's perfect. It survives because it forgives. It bends without breaking. It waits without speaking. And it listens even when it's been hurt. That's what those cameras taught me. That truth can hurt, but it can also heal. That sometimes the person you suspect of betraying you is really just trying to find a way to love you again. I turned off the last light in the hallway that night, feeling lighter than I had in months. The air in the house felt different, not haunted anymore, but home again. And as I stood by the doorway, I whispered to myself, sometimes it takes breaking trust to see what was always true. Because in the end, the hidden cameras didn't reveal a secret lover or a lie. They revealed the simplest truth of all, that love, even when it hides, still finds its way back home. It has been months since that winter when everything quietly changed. The cameras are gone, the recordings deleted, and the secrets laid to rest. Our house feels lighter now, almost as if it forgave us before we forgave each other. The rooms that once echoed with suspicion are filled again with the sound of ordinary life, the clinking of cups, the creak of floorboards, the faint hum of a life rebuilt. Some mornings I sit by the window with my tea, watching the sunlight crawl across the carpet. It reaches the same old spots it always did, but now it feels like grace instead of routine. My husband hums in the kitchen, pretending to remember where I keep the sugar. I let him look. It's a small act of kindness, letting someone find what's already in front of them. I often think about the woman I was before the cameras. She was tired, lonely, and certain she was being deceived. She lived on instinct, driven by the ache of being unseen. But the truth is, love doesn't disappear when it's quiet. It just changes shape. I learned that the hard way, through grainy footage and tears I never meant to shed. What those hidden cameras showed me wasn't betrayal. It was vulnerability. It was the proof that even after 40 years, a man can still be haunted by the fear of losing the woman he loves. I thought I'd caught him lying. Instead, I caught him grieving. The world outside our home has moved on. New neighbors, new seasons. But inside, time feels slower now. We don't rush our days anymore. We walk together to the market, share a single umbrella when it rains, and sometimes sit quietly in the garden as dusk settles. It's strange how peace can come not from perfection, but from acceptance. People ask me sometimes, "How did you forgive him?" I never quite know how to answer. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you do all at once. Maybe it's something you live, one morning at a time, one shared silence after another. You stop replaying the moment that hurt you, and you start noticing the ones that heal you instead. Now, when I think of truth, I no longer think of it as a weapon. I think of it as a mirror, one that shows you not only what's broken, but what's still worth keeping. My truth wasn't that my husband deceived me. It was that I had stopped seeing him clearly. I had let the noise of fear drown out the small, steady heartbeat of love that was still there all along. Sometimes before bed, I open the wooden chest he built. The smell of cedar fills the room. Inside are photographs, yellowed, curling at the edges, but still holding the warmth of the years we lived. Our son's drawings, our wedding invitation, a pressed flower from the day he first brought me home. Each item feels like a page from a story we almost forgot how to read. I trace my fingers over the photographs and whisper to myself, "You found the truth, and it set you free, not from him, but from fear." Because fear is what ruins love. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being lied to, fear of seeing too much. But when you face it, you remember why you loved in the first place. The cameras are gone, but the lesson they taught me remains. You can't guard love by watching it. You guard it by trusting it. And when trust breaks, you rebuild it, quietly, with patience and time. So here I am, still standing, still learning, still loving. My story isn't one of revenge or exposure. It's one of rediscovery. I didn't expose a lie. I uncovered a truth I had stopped believing in. And that truth, once seen, never fades. If you're still listening, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you felt the person you loved was hiding something from you? Would you look for proof? Or would you wait to hear their heart before judging their silence? Because sometimes the proof you find doesn't destroy love. It reminds you of it. If you've ever doubted someone you love, remember this. Truth can hurt, but it can also heal. And if this story made you feel something, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you rather live with lies you don't see or face the truth that might set you free?